LowRes Wonder.
Alright guys, I hate ads and you hate ads, so let's keep this under 10 seconds. Support LowRes Wonder Bread on Patreon and help us create brand new films, video essays, and series. Patreon.com/LowRes.
I think that it's still possible to scare people in a really honorable way if they care about the characters.
In the last two installments of Deconstructing, I covered the growth of Cary Fukunaga's adaptation of it and the formation of Fukunaga's script in 2014, which notably deviated from its source material, the Stephen King novel of the same name. Before I get into the 2015 script, which divorces itself even farther from the book, I just want to say thanks to those members of the LowRes community that helped contribute to this episode and the next by sending in scripts and information about the Lost Project. And I really cannot stress this next part enough. You guys are single-handedly responsible for turning this dissection of an unmade film into 4 chapters rather than the originally planned 2. Thank you so much for supporting the channel and tuning in for each installment. Your voices are definitely heard. Now, on with Deconstructing Cary Fukunaga's It, Part 3. Stephen King's most often cited complaint with Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is that it failed to capture the heart of his book, that it was a cold, dead adaptation of King's novel about addiction and the personal ghosts that haunt us. After reading the 2014 draft of Cary Fukunaga's It, I could not help but feel that this criticism would have actually served as a deft critique of Fukunaga's script. It had the body of Stephen King's It, but not the spirit. It captured many of the darkest elements of the book, and even expanded upon them, but failed to showcase the genuine camaraderie and friendship between the characters. They weren't so much pals as they were a battalion of child soldiers with a common enemy. Discussions were had online about this script from 2014, which had leaked the same day as the first trailers released. And in Facebook groups and subreddits, there seemed to be an overlap and confusion among some users. When conversing about the script, it seemed as if some readers had a wildly different draft than the one being described by readers, members of forums, and journalists. A draft with a missing title page and lead character. This companion script was later identified as the 2015 draft by Cary Fukunaga and Chase Palmer. Keeping the last script I had read in mind and the differences reported in this particular draft, I felt certain it would continue to treat King's material like a used condom. However, when I had gotten the script, I was completely surprised that the script itself had been almost entirely rewritten. The story tenets of the 2014 draft were still in place, but that was essentially where the similarities both began and ended. Right off the bat, I noticed that these characters, which were so flat before, in spite of Fukunaga's many cries that the studio wanted archetypes, were actually multi-dimensional and quite likable. We're introduced to Will Denbrough once again, and this time there's an extra layer to him that I personally found to be a strong inclusion to this draft and immediately made it impossible to not root for this kid. As we've seen many times before, at the start of the script there's a passage in which Georgie, Bill's younger brother, is lured into the sewer by Pennywise. Unlike past incarnations, however, the result of this interaction is left a mystery to the characters. For them, Georgie just seemingly disappeared one day. So due to that inconclusive resolve regarding his brother's fate, Will possesses a belief that his brother George is still out there, somewhere, and that maybe this journey that the summer is taking him on will lead him to wherever Georgie is. Later we're introduced to Richie, Eddie, Ben, Beverly, Mike, and Stan. Yes, despite what you may have heard, Stan is still in this draft. However, his species has been altered from human to Carassius auratus, or goldfish. Fukunaga reduced the lucky 7 down to 6, and for those shrieking in horror right now about this alteration and the fact that it was a gigantic leap away from King's material, and therefore must have been a change for the worse, I recommend that you hear Fukunaga out on this one. While initially skeptical myself, I personally found the change to be a wise decision for this script. If we're going to be honest with ourselves, Stan is the least necessary member of the Losers Club. He offers nothing beyond a body count and a warning to the rest of the far more interesting losers that the stakes against Pennywise are real. Now, while that may speak to a bigger problem with these versions of the script and not necessarily the character from the book himself, for Fukunaga's drafts, Stan is clutter without a genuine purpose. He almost serves as an excuse for the entire third act to tip off around the bar mitzvah. When reading that 2014 script, his inclusion watered down the rest of the character stories, and in this updated draft, that couldn't be farther from the case. By clipping Stan, Cary Fukunaga managed to make the majority of the other losers far more engaging and likable. Notice how I say majority there, though, because one other character does receive a major disservice. Stan's stronger character traits are absorbed by Richie Goldfarb, not Tozier. Richie, in this version, as I briefly mentioned in the last installment, is a Jewish, bisexual, if not gay, young man with a bar mitzvah approaching. Despite those massive changes to Richie, throughout all the drafts written, Richie seems to be the most consistently aligned with the source material as far as characterization goes. Beverly is then introduced to us, and this version in particular harps on her notably unearned reputation at school for being promiscuous. This was merely alluded to in the initial draft of it, but here it is a huge part of her character. The ridicule she faces among her peers, including, unintentionally so, from her own friends, is painful to read and makes her easy to empathize with. Her troubling relationship with her father, which at times treads into the uncomfortable territory of almost reading like Tumblr Daddy's Girl fanfiction, is boosted noticeably as well here. While the actual physical interactions between Beverly and her father remain at a minimum, there are some genuinely creepy lines of dialogue in this script that are suggestive enough to make your skin crawl. Alvin Marsh gets quite a bump in terms of importance in this script. Fukunaga outlines more to Marsh than we got in the 2014 cut, and also the King book. He's a multifaceted character, and his own wrongdoings could arguably be attributed to Pennywise, as the clown itself takes credit for letting him live in an interaction with Alvin as a child, simply so he could grow up and molest Beverly and become her nightmares. Alvin has this mindset in which everyone he provides for or financially accommodates belongs to him, and because they belong to him, he can bypass traditional bounds as they are his property. He frequently regards Beverly as his special girl, and there's even a line in the script in which it is implied by Alvin, of course, that she vocally permits her father's behavior. He is, without a doubt, the seediest of the characters found in this story. Mike Hanlon, second to Stan, suffers the biggest disservice from this script. In the 2014 draft, both Mike and his father Leroy were fleshed out and well developed. In this script, every bit of dimension those characters had was flushed away. Mike is simply known for not taking shit from anyone, and Leroy maybe has 3 or 4 lines max throughout the entire 121 pages. The entire backstory of Leroy and his son living on a farm, being butchers, and killing cattle gets wiped away in favor of a burger joint. Leroy owns a diner and dairy, and Mike works the counter in his homeschool. That is literally about the gist of their characters. The history of it is explored in a different fashion with this draft. In the previous installment, I voiced my lament over the fact that Pennywise was featured in an Old West-style saloon playing the piano during a murder. It came across as very cartoonish and did not jive with the rest of the material. In this version, Fukunaga dips into a different point in Derry's history. Rather, the English settlers and Native Americans claiming it as their home in 1625. This scene is one of the best of the entire script. It sets Pennywise up as almost a Wendigo-type creature stalking the pioneers before moving in on them in the dead of night to devour their children. This is truly Pennywise's origin in this script, or at least the closest we come to a reason as to why he specifically seeks out kids. Hearing a noise in the middle of the night, one of the pioneers, a mother, goes to check up on her children with a candle in hand. She enters the bedroom, where the 4 children are supposed to be sound asleep, and in the corner, crouched over a child, is Pennywise. His fangs razor sharp, reared, and ready to dig into one of the frightened younglings. His physical formation is described as appearing incomplete, his flesh pale and translucent, like a half-formed imitation of a human. The mother interrupts Pennywise from meeting his goal of eating this young girl, her own daughter, and makes a decent attempt at trying to scare him away with a musket, which is ultimately in vain. They share select words, which give us insight to the pioneer's situation and Pennywise's MO. He's been feeding on their people for some time, picking them off one after another. And after that gun is broken and all hope is lost, the mother attempts to sacrifice herself for her child. But that doesn't meet Pennywise's satisfaction, as he is seemingly infatuated with this girl's fear. She begs for him to take her instead, and Pennywise affirms that he will, along with all the other children, and her husband, and the natives that led her to Derry, unless she willingly exits the room and allows Pennywise to eat her daughter. Pennywise claims that he will spare her life, her husband's, and her other children. The woman chooses to exit the room and allows her child to die. Before finishing the young girl off, Pennywise removes a trinket from her neck, that of a wooden bee. He keeps it as a souvenir. Admittedly, it's not quite the Pennywise we know from Stephen King's It. This sequence is entirely of Fukunaga's creation, but the creepiness of it elevates the movie as a whole and adds a vibe that is reminiscent of John Carpenter's The Thing. What actually is Pennywise? And is that something that's even truly determined in the book beyond being a cosmic ancient evil from outside of our universe? The reason why this scene works so well, even for a King fan such as myself who has read the novel multiple times, is that it adds a subtle variation to this evil we've come to know so well. That this Pennywise in the script is perhaps not the Pennywise of King lore. Maybe he didn't arrive from the clouds one day and fall into the earth. Maybe it's not a giant spider or starfish hiding behind those dim white eyes. When you explain what your evil is, it becomes less effective in its attempt to scare. If you compare modern horror to those films of the past and why they were so effective, rarely were in-depth explanations offered for creatures or demonic presences existing. We see now with Blumhouse and James Wan that you can't have a simple haunting without giving the audience 20 years of backstory or an analysis on what the afterlife actually is. But here, we're given a glimpse, perhaps an explanation as to why Derry's residents are the way they are, willfully ignorant as a result of some sort of genetic memory. But it doesn't really explain why it is doing what it does, and that alone is enough to add an extra unnerving layer. When it comes to the story, not a whole lot has changed. The losers band together one after another, leading them into the sewer to battle with Pennywise, who, in this rendition, is not a Lovecraftian starfish, but a gas. An orange gas.
No!
Yes!
No!
Yes!
No!
Yes!
Yes! No!
Yes!
Yes!
I gotta say, it's not as compelling or as visually interesting as the ending of the original draft, but overall, the resolve when they defeat Pennywise is much more satisfying. The clown attempts to manipulate Will by taking on the form of his lost brother George. Instead of buying into it, Will smashes Pennywise over the head with a rock, causing it to expel an orange gas and then disappear. This causes a temporary ruffle of reality and for a flood, like in the novel, to rush through Derry, washing up the remains of many of the lost children, including Georgie Denbrough. With the writing here, their friendship and the coming together of the losers feels much more organic, unlike the previous version. At the end of it all, the individual stories of the losers wrap up quite nicely in a way that is reminiscent to the conclusion of Stand By Me, each child going off in their own direction, unsure of whether or not they'll see one another again. Cary Fukunaga and Chase Palmer, with this later draft, cleared up many of the problems of their initial rendition of the story and created a far more readable script. I have to admit that, in spite of my personal taste clashing a bit with the changes in material, it was one of the best unproduced screenplays I've ever read. However, given the radical changes to the source material, I can't imagine that many hardcore Stephen King or It fans would be particularly pleased. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, given your opinion, we can see with the shooting script, the changes made in this draft were ultimately cut in favor of a more traditional structure. At least as of the Gary Dauberman revision, which I will be getting into next week, Stan's placement in the script was restored, Richie's bar mitzvah was called off, and Will Denbrough and Travis Bowers returned to being Bill Denbrough and Henry Bowers. Would you have preferred to see this radically different version of it, or are you happy that New Line Cinema went with a more traditional draft? Sound off in the comments below and stay tuned next week as I get into the Dauberman revision of Cary Fukunaga's It, which was a weird Frankenstein mashup of the two scripts previously talked about, along with brand new material. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and please hit the thumbs up button over in the bottom right hand corner. I'll see you for the next one, guys.